commitment to hazing prevention. But also what we hope these resources will help you do is really think about if you feel like you've kind of been that lone soldier in some of this hazing prevention work, or you know this is something that needs to come back to the campus, and you're really trying to map out a plan for what some of these efforts could look like. We'll talk through how some of the tools can be a resource for doing just that. And for those of you who are still building up kind of your prevention toolbox, whether that's hazing prevention or otherwise, one of the things both of our organizations really works to do is help make sure that you're aware of existing resources. So whether you have that budget that's already in place that's going for hazing prevention, or whether you don't, that there's a good starting point to get you to where you need to go. And we're going to see some good examples, certainly as some of the campuses share today, as to what some of that progression could or should look like. So we're going to move on to our next Mentimeter question, and this one is open-ended. So what we would love to see or hear from you is, what does your campus currently do for hazing prevention? So what are some of the practices that are already in place in relation to hazing prevention? So you can go ahead and type in that answer. We know that'll take a couple extra moments. Okay, so we're starting to see some answers come in. Great.
Is it the same code?
Yes, the same code. Now, one thing you might need to do, you might see an alert at the top of your screen that says that the presenter's gone to a new slide. And once you click, it'll give you the option to go to the new slide if you're not seeing that new question pop up. So thanks for that. All right, so I'm seeing a lot of different options start to come through, a lot of them tied to things like new member education, new student orientation, many of you talking about speakers and training, but I'm also seeing things tied to your policies around hazing. So for example, hazing amnesty, so that people can come forward and share their experiences or share their concerns without that particular fear around what's going to happen if they choose to report that or share that. Advisor training, so training for the people who are working with some of our student groups, and maybe that's around how to identify hazing or how to respond to a report or things like that, but we're going to be talking about that further. Title IX presentation, so connecting some of those other goals at the institution to where and how we might see incidents related to Title IX, or even things like sexual violence, for example, in connection with hazing incidents. Workshops, seminars, bystander intervention, so really applying that bystander intervention framework to hazing and other types of incidents on campus. Excellent. So a lot of really great examples here for what that's looked like. And it looks like a really broad range. One of the things that we'll talk about is certainly hazing is not specific to one type of student group. And so what works with certain groups or in certain arenas might not always translate into other spaces. So I really love the variety of the types of prevention efforts that we're seeing here. And I'm sure there's so much more even that we could share. So it's been really great to kind of watch the scroll of all of those really fantastic examples. And we're going to be thinking more broadly about what that could look like or how that might evolve as we go throughout the webinar. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Allen, who's going to talk a little bit about our why.
All right, thank you so much, Abby. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. Elizabeth Allen, she, her pronouns. As Abby mentioned, I'm professor of higher education at the University of Maine and founder and principal of StopHazing. So happy to be here with this great team of co-presenters. And before we continue with the content specific to commitment to hazing prevention, we want to pause for a moment and just reflect on why devote and dedicate resources to hazing prevention. Might seem obvious at the outset, but to just ground our work today, our content today, we want to take a moment to think through this a little bit further. So there are many reasons why we think commitment to hazing prevention is vital. But first and foremost, of course, it's about student safety and well-being, seeing students' lives at risk, lives lost, and the deep wounds and enduring emotional scars that can occur as a result of hazing are what prompted me to get involved in this work early in my career as a campus professional and practitioner working in student activities, student leadership development, and fraternity and sorority life. Many in the general public have seen news stories where the intersections of hazing and alcohol misuse and have been lethal. We also know that a percentage of hazing involves sexual violence and harassment. So there are many intersections impacting campus safety when considering hazing. As we think about hazing prevention, though, we are also thinking, in addition to preventing the senseless and tragic loss of student lives, we are also focusing on how hazing prevention is a key part of an overall comprehensive approach to student well-being, inclusion, and healthy campus communities. So in addition to hazing's profound impact on individuals, we also know that it impacts campus as an institution and the communities in which it occurs. So as this slide conveys, we see that the impact of hazing can have on, for example, institutional liability, the public relations chaos that it can cause. And so prevention can help mitigate that. Prevention can help to cultivate and support campus climates that are welcoming, inclusive, and safe and supportive, thus enhancing student persistence and strengthening the institution's retention goals. Okay, next slide, please. All right. So with that, Abby, I think turning it over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we wanted to do is just establish a little bit of why we're talking about this work together. A lot of times when people think about Clery Center, they might not necessarily think about hazing and hazing prevention. But we've been really lucky to work in partnership with StopHazing for many years now, related to certain things for hazing prevention. And it really started out of a collaboration stemming from two of our board members, Gary and Julie Diversely, who lost their son, Gary, to hazing. And as part of all of the work that they've done in honor of their son, one of the resources that we've created at Clery Center is called We Don't Haze. And it's a documentary that really highlights the stories of students who have experienced hazing, but also really looks at what does hazing prevention look like, particularly through a bystander lens. And certainly when we were working to develop that resource, we knew we needed to bring in the experts to make sure that as we were covering the content, that really what we were creating is not only useful or entertaining to watch or interesting to watch, but also effective. And so we happened to see Dr. Allen at a conference and gave her a phone call and said, would you work with us? And we were so lucky that she said yes, and it really forged a partnership that has lasted for many years. And you're going to see, certainly one impact of that as we talk about the action guide, but we're really fortunate to partner with StopHazing on a number of different efforts. Right now, one of those efforts is in relation to policy. My colleague Cheryl is going to plug a link into the chat related to a bill that could potentially amend the Clery Act to not only include reports of hazing incidents within Clery statistics, but also importantly focus on how the institutions prevent hazing in the first place. What do their prevention efforts look like? And what we as an organization really love to look at is how do we support institutions in those prevention goals, and how can we support institutions to really lay a framework for prevention and response to hazing even before it's supported by a federal bill. bill. Many of you live in states where there may already be state legislation related to hazing, but StopHazing and Clery Center also really think it's important to look at that on the federal level so that there can be consistency across institutions, across states in relation to those definitions and in how institutions are approaching and addressing these issues. And as evidenced by all of your examples earlier, we know that there are a lot of campuses who are proactively already doing that work. So if you click on that link, you can learn more about all of our efforts in relation to report and educate about Campus Hazing Act, or REACH, which is what it's known as. In addition to that, we've also worked to develop resources connected to both We Don't Haze to help institutions utilize the film itself, and also toolkits, a hazing prevention toolkit for hazing or for campus professionals, so that institutions can really have a better understanding of what some of this research looks like, the hazing prevention framework that Dr. Allen's going to highlight with you in just a moment, and have some tangible next steps for implementing some of that framework. So I'm going to hand it back over to Dr. Allen, who's going to share more information about the impetus for some of these resources.
Thanks, Abby. And it's so true. It has been such a highlight of our professional work at StopHazing to have partnered with and continuing to partner with Clery on these initiatives. And I will say, you know, I am lead on the research at StopHazing, and the brilliance for translating the research to practice emerges from this collaboration and the incredible work of folks who have participated in the Hazing Prevention Consortium, which I will tell you a little bit more about now. So depicted on the left, you see our visual for the consortium. We call it HPC for short. It's a research to practice initiative that began back in 2014 with a group of 8 universities. We are now on cohort 3. It's a 3-year design of a research to practice model where we're working with these campuses to support their campus-wide hazing prevention efforts, and at the same time, gather data to build an evidence base to support effective hazing prevention. That could be translated to be used on any campus. And so on the right side of the slide, you see here the visual of our hazing prevention framework. And this emerged from data that we gathered in that first cohort of the HPC. We analyzed data from multiple sources that included a campus hazing survey, campus hazing culture and climate assessment reports that included interviews and focus groups with students and staff at all the institutions, a hazing prevention rubric with stakeholder interviews, and evaluation case studies of prevention strategies at each campus. We modeled the hazing prevention framework that includes 8 components on the strategic prevention framework, which many of you may be familiar with. It's sometimes called SPIF for short, or the SPF, developed by SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. So many of the components are similar or the same as what's in the SPF. And you see they are interrelated and cyclical rather than linear in progression or hierarchical. So they all flow into one another and inform one another, yet they are discrete categories or elements of effective prevention. And we know this from the work that's been done in public health and prevention science. And then through our research specific to hazing prevention, we learned there's another component that is critical for hazing prevention specifically, and that is commitment, and what we're here to talk about today. So that's the 8th component you see, and that again emerged from our data gathering and analysis specific to hazing prevention. Next slide, please. So commitment refers to the investment of human, financial, and structural resources and public endorsement of actions to foster a campus climate that is inhospitable to hazing. So this came up repeatedly as a theme in our data gathering to complement those other vital aspects of comprehensive hazing prevention. So assessment, planning, implementation, cultural competence, evaluation, all these things are important, sustainability, they're all vital, but really key on a college campus, and we would argue in any organization, is this commitment component. And so that's why we're here today and why we've worked on the action guide, and we've done a little bit more research to dig deeper into what's involved in commitment. What does it look like? How does it play out in practice? All right. So before we dig into more of that, we have a Mentimeter question. What are some actions that campuses could take to demonstrate commitment to hazing prevention? In your view, what are some things that come to mind in your experience that really show that commitment? Funding, that's a biggie. Bringing in professionals. Dedicated staff, absolutely. Seeing some similar themes here in terms of funding, staffing, transparency, absolutely. These are ringing true to what we've learned in our work. Disciplining chapters regardless of their history at the institution, okay. Yeah. Trainings, great. Dedicated staffing and funding. Oh, having students engaged on the topic, absolutely so important. Open discussions, that transparency, having senior leaders, presidents and vice presidents making statements against hazing and participating in initiatives. Absolutely, so important. That visible campus leadership is key. Getting more information out about hazing. Absolutely. Some people are still confused about what it is. When does some behaviors cross the line into hazing? And so that is a key aspect of commitment, as well as building that knowledge base campus-wide, not just in certain stakeholder groups. Programming. Wow, this is fantastic. So many excellent responses here. And lots of themes. Involving students again. Just looking here to see if there's anything. Top-down support, absolutely. We heard over and over in our research from working with campus professionals that they did not always feel supported in this sometimes very challenging work. And so that goes to the heart of commitment. Absolutely. All right. Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you all. Okay. So with those great ideas, we can see some of them reflected in the slide, which depicts the different types of actions for commitment that are organized into 4 quadrants according to Bolman and Deal's 4 frames of organizations. So these are political, structural, human resources, and symbolic. And we used these 4 frames to analyze our data that were specific to commitment for hazing prevention. So the structural frame, just to briefly describe each of these a little bit more before we focus on the examples. The structural frame is based on a set of assumptions that reflect a more static understanding of organizations in comparison to the other frames. It emphasizes the achievement of goals and objectives, efficiency, coordination, control, rationality, and effective structures. In contrast to the structural frame, the human resource frame accounts for individual motivation, personality types, and capacity in organizational success. The political frame is different in that it provides a perspective of organizations as coalitions, coalitions of diverse individuals and interest groups that are often competing for scarce resources. Sound familiar? Probably not. So while this political frame highlights the importance of stakeholder groups with conflicting values and goals, it also emphasizes the need for bargaining and negotiation around limited resources. And in contrast to the other three, the symbolic frame is focused on the meaning making of what happens in organizations. The symbolic frame is characterized by the assumption that culture, in this case, campus culture, bonds members of the organization together, and that symbols can help provide clarity in times of uncertainty. We can think of, campus mascots, for example, as a symbolic element of the organization. And there are many other examples of symbolic aspects of colleges and universities. And you see here in the bullet points, just a few examples of the ways in which we saw the data around campus commitment to hazing prevention sort of falling into one of these four buckets. And certainly there weren't always very clear lines, and there's some overlap. But you can see, for example, let's just look at structural, and a number of folks mentioned these examples, financial support, designated staff persons working on hazing prevention, having it in job descriptions, and having folks evaluated, their job performance evaluated based on working on hazing prevention, having systems in place to track what's happening with both informal and formal reports related to hazing. Making data-driven decisions. So you need to have data to do that. So collecting the data and having systems to do that, and ensuring that it's happening in a timely way and on an annual basis. And strategic planning. Those are all examples of structural, of types of ways in which hazing prevention, commitment to hazing prevention is seen through a structural lens. And for example, in human resources, we might focus there on thinking about the trainings, the building of knowledge, the building of skills and capacity for hazing prevention through bystander intervention trainings, information sharing, as was noted in the last Mentimeter question. Many of you hit on these kinds of examples that would be understood within the human resource frame. The campus-wide orientation, that last bullet point there is meant to convey that hazing prevention is often seen within the purview of a single office on many campuses. And it's most typically something that folks say, oh, well, that's fraternity and sorority life. That's in their job description. They take care of hazing prevention. But what we've worked to do in the consortium and are working to do through these resources in collaboration with Clery Center is to really broaden that, and through the data, make it clear that hazing isn't simply limited. While it is an issue for fraternities and sororities, it is not limited to that stakeholder group only. And we see high percentages of athletes experiencing hazing. We see hazing happening in honor societies and performing arts groups. intramural sports, club sports, and other areas as well. And so we need to, it's really important if we're really going to demonstrate commitment to hazing prevention and really move the needle on shifting campus culture related to hazing, that we have this orientation to prevention that is really campus-wide and not a siloed approach. Okay. Next slide, please. All right. And I'm going to turn it over to Jermaine to start us off with some specific examples of this commitment in action.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Again, my name is Jermaine Graham, and I serve as the chairperson of our Hazing Prevention Task Force on our campus, but my primary duties at UCF focus on student leadership development. I serve as the Associate Director in the Lead Scholars Academy and the Director of the President's Leadership Council, which brings me to some of the bold moves that our leadership have made on our campus in regards to commitment to hazing. My traditional role is, my work role is not in a traditional role of fraternity and sorority life as the chairperson of hazing on our campus, but it is focused on student development. And so our past vice president really wanted to emphasize that hazing is a campus issue, and it's a campus responsibility to focus on it. And so she took someone who was not in one of those traditional roles in working with hazing, as Elizabeth just talked about, and she allowed me to do that. Some other bold moves that were made by our key leadership figures on our campus was in the spring of 2013, UCF decided to put a pause on Greek life activities to address issues related to hazing and alcohol. And at the time, my vice president of student affairs wanted to make sure that Greek students had time to reflect on the values of what the UCF Creed is. And so during that time, the institution decided that we needed to address hazing directly by assigning a staff person, which at that time was me, to serve as a campus liaison to the first cohort in the Hazing Prevention Consortium that Elizabeth just talked about. And I think that's important because it indicates that there is a financial commitment from the institution to address hazing, because it is a 3-year commitment that includes your institution's buy-in and their finances. So I think that was a really bold move for our campus at that time. It also indicated that hazing is not just, as I stated before, a Greek life issue. Our vice president, she's since retired, but I'm using her as an example because she was the senior leadership person who was the most visible with hazing prevention on our campus. She was also very instrumental in selecting staff members across campus to serve, faculty and staff members to serve on the Hazing Prevention Task Force. And most times when you develop a task force, you gather folks who are interested, but may not have the time or may not have the buy-in from their supervisors to be released to do it. But our vice president gave the charge to the committee and really was hands-on in selecting who would be a part of that, which again, her direct influence emphasized the importance of the work of hazing prevention. Another bold move that was made was to mandate educational program for all incoming students, our freshmen and our transfer students, in addition to taking modules related to academic integrity, consent, and alcohol issues. We also mandated that our students would take a module related to hazing prevention, and they're all required to take that. And the last example that I wanted to share was the involvement of our vice president, along with other senior student affairs directors and vice presidents, working with the Board of Governors to across our state to really address hazing prevention, alcohol issues a lot of those preventative strategies were coming from them directly. And one of the events that we had on an annual basis was the Hazing Prevention Summit, which is attended by student affairs professionals across the state of Florida. And so all of this really sends a message from the top down that our institution is serious about hazing prevention from the time that the students enter until they graduate. I'm going to now hand it over to Brian to continue sharing examples from his institution.
All right, thanks, Jermaine. My name is Brian Joyce. I'm an assistant dean for student life at Dartmouth College, and I use he, him pronouns. I just wanted to run through some examples from Dartmouth College, and I'll start in the political sphere. One of the things that we did was, as many have pointed out, hazing prevention was primarily seen as a fraternity sorority life issue. And so the hazing website that we had with the hazing policy and reporting structures were housed under the fraternity sorority life website, which I think starts to send an institutional message about where we think hazing is. And again, there was certainly data to suggest that it happened in our fraternities and sororities, but it ignored the many other facets of campus life where this existed, and some of the institutional ways in which that was reinforced. And so I think this was a huge political win for us to put the hazing prevention website onto the Division of Student Affairs site. It did a few things for us. I mean, it centralized information. It enabled us to get some more traction on strengthening our reporting processes, and then we were able to analyze some other areas of our reporting. We added reporting processes to our campus safety app that students download on mobile devices. We were able to publish all accusations of hazing on the community standards website. So we have full transparency now. You can go back through years and years of any hazing allegation, and any finding of responsibility certainly is on there with the penalty, that the accountability measures that we took for those actions. And so parents and students and other stakeholders can go through those. So I think that was really important. Moving on to structural, I won't dwell on this too much because Jermaine touched on it as well, but we also we had to create a staff commitment through a campus-wide coalition. And so that one thing that did was get this out of fraternity sorority life, but it enabled us to get some senior level buy-in. We were able to develop some ongoing training and education so that our entire campus community has an understanding of hazing. We are now institutionalizing commitment and participation on this coalition. If one person leaves the institution, that department's staffed with replacing them. And so we have representation from athletics, student involvement, the Student Wellness Center, community standards, students, so all over the institution. And so that's really helped us keep hazing prevention on the radar, even when there's not an incident. And that's kind of where we were at before our participation in the consortium. Was hazing only came up when it was a crisis. In terms of human resources, we created a new student leader workshop that is now applicable for all student organizations. So we've been piloting this in athletics, fraternity sorority life, and our general student organization leadership. And it focuses on values of the organization. And so we actually used the words, hazing and hazing prevention very little in the presentation, because we are focusing on being an inclusive organization. And if you want to be inclusive and to live out the values of your organization, we're focusing on what you can do rather than that that focus. They're getting plenty of training on what you cannot do and what is covered in our hazing policy. So this student leadership workshop focuses on some other things, and then we utilize a case study format to allow them to dive into how to make improvements to an organizational culture that's already diving into some troubling traditions. So that's been a really successful workshop. We plan to continue that and expand upon it to get it into the hands of more student leaders. And then finally, in the symbolic area, again, similar to Jermaine, we have a lot of similarities. We are requiring a training and workshop for all students who are interested in joining a Greek organization. So we've completely overhauled that new member presentation to incorporate some peer-to-peer leadership, which is crucial. We've never been able to get students to kind of stand against hazing. And now we have fraternity and sorority leaders making that symbolic commitment. And it's been, I think, it's really important. But some of the other things that we've done are add more information around the spectrum of hazing, because we found in a lot of our data that students were focused on violent forms of hazing and dismissing harassment or other types of hazing that didn't involve forced consumption of alcohol or violence. And so we're now covering that a little bit more in our existing information and dispelling some of the myths that only violent hazing is bad. So yeah, happy to answer any questions as we go along. I think that's some of the highlights. And I'll pass it over now to Jenny Walker from the University of Texas at Austin.
Thanks, Brian. So hi, all. My name is Jenny Walker. I serve as the Prevention and Risk Management Coordinator at the University of Texas at Austin. So just to touch upon a few of the aspects of commitment that we have for hazing prevention at UT. In terms of staff, we actually have 2 dedicated staff members to hazing prevention. So myself included, I work primarily connecting the dots with all student organizations around risk reduction and safety. And I also co-chair our hazing prevention committee for campus. And then we also have an interesting position, our sorority and fraternity life parent and family outreach coordinator. This is a pilot position that works specifically in the Houston community to take an upstream and community-based approach to hazing prevention initiatives. So they really work to reach out to parents and students that are newly admitted to the University of Texas at Austin. They also work with community members, alumni and whatnot in the Houston community to, again, really try and create a culture of care and change the narrative around hazing in that community in particular. Similar to what Brian and Jermaine shared, we have a campus website dedicated to hazing prevention, hazing.utexas.edu. On that website, we are able to share out information about what hazing is, prevention initiatives, reporting, support options, and then also violations that we have seen occur within the past 3 years or that have had sanctions concluded within the past 3 years. So that's been really helpful for us to be able to provide that transparency, especially as students are thinking about what organizations they want to join, or as parents or family members have questions, we're able to route them there. That information also gets sent out to all incoming students throughout orientation and then throughout the year as well to current students. And that's in alignment with state laws in the state of Texas. I would also say our Hazing Prevention Committee has been really critical to us solidifying that campus-wide approach. I think historically, sometimes it's easy for hazing prevention to end up in sorority and fraternity life. And I think by us having our Hazing Prevention Committee, it's a really robust team of folks from academic units and areas all across campus, rec sports and whatnot. I think that's really helped solidify our campus-wide approach and make sure that that stays the center of what we're doing. Interestingly enough, we are currently underway of launching within that Hazing Prevention Committee also a student hazing prevention leadership team. So really trying to create a student space where they can work together, talk about how can they bring hazing prevention to their different pockets of campuses, and what challenges they're facing as student leaders. So trying to empower our students, their voices, and helping them connect with one another around these topics. And then last but not least, just want to touch upon really through our partnership with the Hazing Prevention Consortium, it has been so helpful for us to be able to ground our work in assessment and data and really get better understanding the campus climate that we have at UT and being able to utilize that data to be able to move in a strategic direction moving forward. With that, though, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Dr. Doug Gerard, our Associate Vice President for Campus Life at UT Austin, and he's going to share how he's seen hazing prevention and commitment to hazing prevention at UT evolve over his tenure from a leadership perspective.
Hey, thank you, Jenny, and welcome to everybody who's joined in today. Building upon Jenny's comments, I feel we have some very strong hazing prevention efforts underway at the University of Texas, and kudos to Jenny and many other staff on our campus who are doing this work. But we have more work to do in this area. And as it's been mentioned before, while many of our risk management programs are situated within our sorority and fraternity life unit, our university recognizes that hazing is not unique to our Greek organizations. Our experience tell us, and also our participation in the Hazing Prevention Consortium has provided us with essential data about the culture of hazing on our campus, underscoring that it's not a Greek issue alone, and also highlighting some of the harms of hazing. This greater understanding has informed our approach, which I would say many years ago was perhaps more about highlighting hazing policy and laws around hazing, to one of striving to better understand the culture or root causes of hazing. So we administrators, we had to do a culture shift in order to shift culture. And while setting expectations, clear expectations around hazing is important, we recognize that engaging our students in a different manner, providing them with a voice and the tools to affect change, is more effective in shifting culture around hazing. As Jenny mentioned, we have a variety of student-facing programs and initiatives. This also includes our organizational consultation meetings conducted by staff with organizational leaders, and also even our mutual agreement process, where we work closely with organizations under sanction to undo past behaviors and change organizational culture. A common theme, whether it be risk prevention workshop or leadership training or consultation, is providing our student leaders the opportunity to explore personal and organizational values and how their activities align with these values. For our student leaders, it's not about having all the answers, but the ability to ask the right questions and the tools to engage in tough conversations. Our programs provide space for this to occur. And it sounds very similar to what Brian is doing up at Dartmouth. Our rules approach also presented, in my opinion, an ambiguity on whose role it was to focus on hazing prevention. Rules enforcement, well, that's student affairs. Well, shifting our approach to one of changing the culture around hazing has provided the opportunity to engage more stakeholders, as everybody can have a role in this effort. To this end, we have been successful in expanding our support mechanisms, both on and off campus, by bringing more campus constituents to the table. Jenny mentioned the Hazing Prevention Committee. And at the university level, establishing hazing prevention as an initiative of the UT Wellness Network by providing training for our advisors and for some organizations involving national headquarters and alumni groups in the conversation. And through the pilot program Jenny mentioned, our Houston program, we provide trainings to parents, youth groups, PTAs, and school advisors. And finally, by supported donors who can get on board with our goal of changing the culture and conversation around hazing, our Transforming Texas Greeks and Houston program are examples of two of our donor-funded programs. And these connections have built a support system around our student-facing initiatives. It allowed us to maximize connections, utilize existing networks, to promote hazing prevention efforts. Our expanded network has also given hazing prevention efforts increased visibility across campus. And importantly, and this is perhaps the most important aspect, it's provided expanded ownership of this issue from our students to campus partners to advisors and our parents. And all of this is done with strong support and involvement from our UT Systems Office, which placed significant emphasis on system-wide hazing prevention, our university president and vice president for student affairs, who remain actively involved and provide financial assistance for our hazing prevention efforts. As I mentioned earlier, we have some strong hazing prevention efforts underway, but more work to do in this area. But I'm confident we have the commitment, the people, and the connections to continue moving the needle in preventing hazing in the right direction. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Doug. And thank you to everyone, Jermaine, Brian, Jenny, those were fantastic examples. Really pioneering or path-breaking work happening through the Hazing Prevention Consortium. And so exciting to hear you all describe some of these initiatives, and I know there are many more. We just have a couple of minutes to highlight, give a shout out to a few other campuses and then some examples which overlap a bit, but wanted to share, for example, at the University of Arizona, they were in cohort 1. They did a 3-part newsletter series that was targeted to parents and families, specific to hazing and hazing prevention, and evaluated that. And so that was a really excellent example of commitment in terms of broadening the efforts and the messaging. At Cornell University, they have and continue to have that visible leadership messaging at the senior level. And they have the vice president for student affairs, as well as the president of the university, sends emails not only to the students and staff and faculty on campus, but to parents and family members as well, really articulating their commitment to hazing prevention and providing information around the policies, around reporting, and aligning that message with the mission of the institution. So it's not just about we don't tolerate, but also about, you know, what we're here for in terms of a university and what our goals are and how hazing doesn't align with that mission. At Tufts and the University of Maine, they've done some really robust work with incorporating hazing prevention into RA training on those campuses. And I know other campuses have done that as well. I just want to give them a shout out. At MIT, they engaged in a really great strategic planning process with their coalition, their Hazing Prevention Coalition, again, grounding it in some data. This was a pivot that was needed, you know, due to COVID. It caused some things that were going to happen, some in-person trainings, to be put on hold, and that pause allowed them to invest some more time and energy into the strategic planning process. At Lehigh University, they've worked really hard to build partnerships and relationships with athletics and with alumni affairs. And so they have not just one representative, but multiple representatives from alumni affairs, both professional staff and alumni themselves, working with their Hazing Prevention Coalition. And that broad-based shared responsibility that we've been talking about and our co-presenters provided examples of has been operationalized by most all of the HPC campuses now. And we would strongly recommend this approach, which is to engage members of that coalition in the leadership of the coalition. So having co-chairs, having subcommittees, where folks can be really engaged in doing the work and providing leadership in the work, thus building and increasing campus capacity for hazing prevention. So those are just a few other examples in addition to the wonderful examples shared by our co-presenters. And with that, we'd like to, I'm going to turn it over here to Abby and Meredith to describe the action guide that we've developed that is available for anyone at no cost and can help to support campus commitment to hazing prevention.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I was just thinking, you know, when I attend webinars like this one, I feel like I can walk away in one of two avenues. One is I'm so excited, I want to implement everything I just heard today. And the other side of that can be, I feel so overwhelmed because I want to implement everything that I've heard today. And so the action guide that we created really is intended kind of for both ends of that spectrum, for you to really think about what implementation of some of these strategies could look like on your campus and really figure out where you are right now and what that can look like for you. I'll also say, because I know we have a number of Clery Center members on the webinar today, for those of you who aren't familiar with that program, Clery Center has a membership program that really encourages institutions to bring together teams of individuals to institutionalize Clery Act compliance. So we've been talking about institutionalization of hazing prevention. Our membership program really does that around Clery Act compliance. And for some of you, I know you had listed in the poll earlier that maybe you're still in that growing period, maybe not just for prevention or hazing prevention, but for prevention in general. So if any of our members are starting to think that, I would just encourage you to think about, for some of the structures that you've started to implement on the Clery side, some of those could be used to help support some of what you're hearing today. So for example, if you have a Clery committee that has a subcommittee that's focusing on prevention efforts, your security awareness programs, that you reflect in your annual security report, your hazing prevention work would certainly fall under that. For those of you who are doing a number of efforts related to dating violence, domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking, we know that certainly, unfortunately, hazing intersects with those crimes as well. So really looking at how might some of our bystander efforts in other places really open up space for some of this additional work related to hazing prevention. So if you're on kind of one end of the spectrum, there's a really great starting point for you. And what we want to be able to help you do is just figure out what that is or what that looks like. So you all received a direct link to the action guide in the email for the webinar. If for some reason you didn't see that, go ahead back to that email. You can find the link and you can download the complete action guide from there. And in that action guide, you'll first find an overview that provides some of the background that you've heard here today to give you an understanding of really the framework that guides this approach to hazing prevention and commitment on campuses. And it also gives you a sense, of what other information you can find in the guide itself. So in the guide, in addition to the overview, you'll find a campus commitment information gathering tool. We're going to walk through and give some additional details of all of these pieces, but I'll just do a quick run through of all of the tools. There's a adaptable slide deck with directions on how to make the case for leadership support. There's a planning resource to help you with some of your strategic planning and your prevention calendar, so to speak, on campus that we'll talk about. We have strategies for engaging students as well as strategies for engaging families. And we know that family can look different to every student. So that can be family however they define that support system for them. And then also a sample letter from campus leadership. So for some of the examples that some of you listed in ways that you're already engaging or that you're already kind of showing that campus commitment to hazing prevention, here are some tangible examples of that for campuses that maybe haven't been able to do that yet, or just to see some other examples of how that might be implemented. So for this first tool, the Campus Commitment Information Gathering tool, we look at this as really kind of the starting point of your roadmap. So even if you are doing a lot of work related to hazing prevention, or you feel like you're just getting started, this will be kind of your pulse check of where you are, because that can help inform some of the other tools that you might utilize, like the strategic planning resources that we'll talk about. So it goes through a number of different questions, all related certainly to campus commitment, so that you can really gauge, what do we already have in place? What might we want to grow or expand? And that covers a range of things, whether it's information related to your policy, if and how one exists and how that's structured, accountability measures and enforcement, and also things related to proactive prevention, information sharing on your website, programming that's being offered, and a number of other components related to campus commitment. So I would encourage you, if you're thinking about using multiple resources, that might be a good starter one, just to gauge where you are before moving on to some of the others. The next one that you'll see is an adaptable slide deck, which I mentioned, and we do have a resource in there that really explains how to utilize it. Essentially what it is it has sample slides for you to think about having a conversation or giving a presentation to leadership on your campus to make the case for the type of support that you might need or want within your campus community. So you might have been sitting during this webinar thinking, I would love for us to be doing XYZ, and I would need these people on board for us to be able to do that. What we wanted to do was really get you started in having that conversation. So for some of you, it might turn out to be exactly kind of this formalized presentation like it's set up. For those of you who maybe that's not the culture on your campus, or that's not the strategy that you want to use, it's still helpful to go through this resource to start to think about, what would that conversation or could that conversation look like? And you'll notice as you go through the slides, it really allows you to look at, what data do we already have that supports what we've already completed, where we need to go, why this is important. And then ultimately, the final kind of piece of it is making the case for what kind of support you need. So that's going to bring us back to a Mentimeter question, because you just saw a lot of really fantastic examples of commitment to hazing prevention. So as you were listening to some of these ideas or thinking about your own campus, what were some of the things that came up for you? What kind of support might you need in relation to hazing prevention? And we know that support can be a broad term. You fill in your answer, so support can mean whatever that looks like for you. So I'm seeing a theme. I think we're sensing a theme so far. We'll give it a few more moments for others to weigh in as well. Right. Okay. So we're starting to see things like funding, certainly. So financial support, data. I love that. I love thinking of data in terms of support. So I would need information as to how this is impacting our campus, for example, or national data as to why it's important that we're talking about hazing in order to be able to implement some of those things. That's a really great suggestion. Time. So that's, that might be an example of support that you need. You'd need space to be able to focus on building some of these programs or ideas. Staffing, I saw a lot of, and certainly that's tied together, right? Whether that's funding for positions, making sure that positions have the time or are able to carve in the time within their positions to be doing some of this work. Equity, that's a really great answer. I'd be interested if you want to chime in again, kind of what that means or how that shows up for you in terms of the type of support that you'd be looking for. You need it to be taken seriously. So that really ties to some of the conversation that was coming up a little bit earlier. I think it was when Doug was sharing, but correct me if I'm wrong in the chat, really talking about we might need kind of a mental shift even in administration on our campus in order to be able to implement some of these things. Great. And so what we'll hope that you'll use that slide deck to do is really think about, okay, well, what are the needs? So if it is funding, what might that funding look like? What could we realistically ask for of our administration? And how do we make that case? So some of the things that you'll see in the slides are also thinking about, certainly anytime we talk about funding, there's also the question of the ways in which these incidents impact our community, whether or not we choose to invest in hazing prevention. And so if the conversation on campus, if there are questions or concerns related to funding, some of the dialogue may be able to go back to, well, if we do have hazing incidents within our community, one, certainly the impact and the harm on the individuals that have been affected by hazing, which is the most important piece. But two, we've also seen the financial impact on institutions, whether that's the impact on the reputational impact that can also then lead to less engagement in the institution, lower enrollment, or that particular piece, or the side effects if there are students that have been impacted and that results in lawsuits or other financial implications. And so what we hope the slide deck will do is allow you to think about how do we communicate kind of the why of why this is important to whoever those leadership roles are that we might be having this dialogue with. You thought about your why right at the beginning of the webinar. How might we utilize that in making the case for why we need some additional support? And then we also want you to think about your messengers as well. So if we go to this next Mentimeter poll, what we want you to think about is who might support you in delivering this message. So when you were listening to some of this conversation about the culture shift that needed to happen, we know that sometimes as we're working to make that culture shift, we have to work with and rely on some of our allies and our colleagues who have established really strong relationships within our community, who may be able to help us articulate why this issue is so important. So if you're thinking about really needing to make the case for additional funding support or additional data, so maybe you're trying to make the case for we'd like to do a climate survey, who are some of the people that you might be able to kind of get in your corner to help deliver that message? One, I love that the first thing we saw here was students, because the student voice matters. So maybe this is an opportunity to have students really speak directly to that impact of hazing and why these resources are so necessary. And those resources, as we saw, also tie into leadership development or a lot of other areas of growth for our students so that they can contribute in ways that are helpful and supportive of the type of community that we're looking to build. Fraternity and sorority life staff, finance department, if we're talking about funding or budget, people in leadership roles, campus security. So it might be an opportunity, especially if we're thinking about broader prevention. Maybe there are ways to engage other roles in thinking about what does the impact of hazing look like within our community? What might prevention look like? National headquarters, student conduct staff. So you'll notice there's really a broad range of roles coming in right now. And I think that's a perfect example about how all of our campuses are different. So who you need in your corner might vary from campus to campus. But two, I think it's also a good example of you don't need to be alone in delivering this message. So think about who your credible messengers are. Who are the people who are most likely to be listened to within the community? And where might you start with some of those initial conversations to get that support and to get that conversation across. And so we hope that the slides will be a really good starting point in really thinking about how do we frame the ask, so to speak? How do we make sure that we're really clearly articulating why we're making this ask and how it influences our community? And so with that in mind, once you've been able to do the planning and you're starting to think about some additional resources and how to acquire them, we also wanted to make sure you had resources available to you as you start planning and implementing some of these other pieces. So Meredith is going to come and share more information about some of the additional resources in the guide.
All right. Oh, thank you so much, Abby, and everybody else who's shared all of their examples. My name is Meredith. I'm the program and outreach coordinator for Stop Hazing, and I use the she series pronouns. And so talking about shifting from what it is that we need for hazing prevention and building that commitment on campus, we also need to plan for hazing prevention. So we decided that this resource should definitely be included in this action guide, because strategic planning can be a little bit daunting, and everybody might do it a little bit differently. However, to reach your prevention goals, a solid plan is certainly helpful. So we created this resource that has multiple documents within it. And it starts off with a structured breakdown of the strategic planning process that we've identified, that pulls in the socio-ecological model, and then also talks about all the different stakeholders that we recommend having be involved in the process, and then also identifying the goals and the focus areas of which those goals fall under, and then evaluating over and over again, and the process repeats. So that breakdown is included, so you'll have some reading material on all of that. And then we've included some sample documents within it as well. So on this slide, you can see we just did a screen grab of one of the samples. And so this could be what a strategic plan is structured like for you as you're beginning your strategic planning process for hazing prevention. But again, everybody does it differently. This could work really well for you, or you might have another format that you already use on your campus. But this could be a great place to start. And you identify what the focus areas are within hazing prevention, and then you'll start to really detail what some specific goals are and what the timelines are. And so then we also included a sample calendar so that you can help keep all of those things organized as you are going along. So that's the planning resource. And then we have a resource for engaging students and families in hazing prevention. And we've actually broken this out into two separate resources, but we talk about them as they're both strategies for engaging. So one is for engaging students, and then the other is for engaging families and their support networks. And in that, or in both of those, we have pulled out overarching themes for how to engage both of those large stakeholder groups. And then we even provided you with some specific examples that you could choose to implement on your campus. So whether that's a social norms campaign or a newsletter or trainings, many things in between. But we thought that it was helpful to provide some specific examples to get you started, and then you can tailor them to what works on your campus. So that's the engaging, strategies for engaging resource. And then lastly, in the action guide is a sample letter from campus leadership. And so we decided to include this. You can use as a framework or a model for you and or your leaders on campus to tailor and then share out with the community. And this, if you think back to the symbolic frame that Dr. Allen was talking about and that many of the presenters also touched on, this is a symbolic gesture that indicates the institution's commitment to hazing prevention, right? And it's an opportunity to reiterate the institution values as well as the policies, programs, and initiatives that are ongoing on campus to really drive the message to whoever you decide to send this to, whether it's students, families, the broader community, staff. There are many stakeholder groups that could and should receive this type of message. And it just reiterates that hazing prevention is a priority on campus and that hazing is not tolerated. And it's a symbolic way of doing that. Okay, so I'm going to pass it back over to Elizabeth briefly here, and then we'll get into some Q&A for you all.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Meredith, the genius who does all the things at StopHazing. So on this slide, you see a quote that from one of our HPC campus professionals that really succinctly summarizes Commitment is about leadership and credibility. And leadership is about mobilizing yourself and others to take action around a common vision. So the title of our new resource, the Action Guide for Campus Commitment to Hazing Prevention, is really reflective of this sentiment. And so we're excited to offer this to you. Hope you'll find it useful in both simplifying and amplifying your campus commitment to hazing prevention. And we have time for a few questions, I believe. Meredith, back to you.
All right, so we have one more open-ended Mentimeter question, which is, at your institution, what might your next steps for hazing prevention be? So we've talked a lot today about different examples of commitment for hazing prevention. And then we transitioned to provide you with some very specific things that you could, the resources that you could begin to use on your campus to bolster hazing prevention and institutional support for it. So this is just to reflect on everything that we've just talked about, and start to get the wheels turning for what you're going to do next. So we're going to get some buy-in from senior leaders and get a group together. Having a hazing prevention committee or coalition is such a great step, and remembering to include folks in those committees from all across campus, to again drive the message that it's a campus-wide issue. Getting a committee started, yep. Get partnership buy-in in across campus. Buy-in from a supervisor, absolutely. An established team, and assessments are very important to help you get that data. And it goes along with the strategic planning process, and that to know where you want to go, you kind of need to know where you are currently. So data helps with that. And then we'll definitely inform your planning process. Look at other forms of hazing besides just in Greek life. Absolutely, again, campus-wide issue. And evaluating current programs. Absolutely. Okay. I'm going to go to the next question, which will be which resources in the action guide are you most excited to use? So this is the last Mentimeter question, but then we have a few minutes left that we can take questions from the audience as well. The adaptable slide deck. I know, I'm very excited. That would be, if somebody gave me a slide deck for me to adapt and tailor to my needs specifically, that would save so much time. Information gathering tool. Getting some likes there. Yes. All right. Well, we are all very excited. Well, I can speak for myself and the folks at StopHazing, but I'm sure Abby and Clery Center would reiterate that we are very excited for you all to have the action guide, download it, have free access to it and all of what's in it, and get to implementing things on your campus.
I'm also excited that there was at least one in every category. So that means that there wasn't an aspect of the guide that nobody was excited to use. So that's a good sign for us. We also wanted to leave some space open for questions. We know that there will likely be more as you start diving into the action guide, but there was a lot of content that was covered here today. So if there are any questions coming up for you, we'd love to hear what those are and be able to respond. I also love that some of you are asking questions in the chat as our campus colleagues were talking about the implementation piece. I saw a question come through regarding mandating training, which is always an adventure. So encourage you to reach out with some of those questions. We also have spoken a little bit about evaluation. This will be a good starting point for us. Our colleague Cheryl just plugged in a webinar evaluation. We really appreciate getting feedback from all of you as to what you appreciated or what was helpful about a webinar. If there are things that you'd like to hear more about, or if there are things that were challenging to you, we'd also like to hear that feedback. So the good, bad, and the in-between, it really helps inform how we collaborate in the future. So if you could take a few minutes to fill out that evaluation. And then the other piece is we also will certainly want to evaluate the action guide and how or whether it's been helpful to you all. So if anyone on the webinar is planning to implement any aspect of the action guide and you'd be interested or willing to be a part of an evaluation process, we'd really love for you to reach out to us and let us know. So folks who will be signing up, anyone that goes to get the guide through our websites will be asking that same question. But since you all were early to the game, we would just love to hear from you if that's something that's of interest to you. I'm plugging my email address into the chat, so feel free to reach out to me or to our colleagues at StopHazing if you'd like to be a part of that down the line. I see a question come through. Several presenters mentioned using hazing case studies. Would anyone be willing to share how they were created or sharing the case studies they use? So I'll sit back and see if one of my colleagues would want to answer that.
Okay, so I can jump in. Oh, no, Brian, you go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to mention that we've been working with Meredith and Elizabeth to create a facilitation guide that would share some case studies, and so that's we've been working on that, and that should be coming out. I'd be happy to share some of the case studies that we've been utilizing with our students. They came from we put together a content team that discussed kind of common scenarios at Dartmouth, and we tried to live in that kind of gray area that students often talk about as being kind of unsure whether or not this is hazing. And again, rather than label these activities as hazing, we sort of talked about like, well, what do you think could go wrong here? How would you improve upon this activity? And how does this fit your organizational values? And so it wasn't necessarily like a this is right or this is wrong type scenario, but I'd be happy to work with someone to share out some of the scenarios that we worked with.
Yeah, and I just want to emphasize something that Dr. Allen put in the chat as well. There are some scenarios in the facilitation guide for We Don't Haze, and those are available at no cost. So I'll go and grab that link as well, and we can plug that into the chat. Any other questions as we wrap up here today? Thank you. So now you get We Don't Haze from multiple sites and links. So we just really appreciate you spending your afternoon with all of us today. Again, please do fill out the evaluation. It will help us know what types of resources and information to make available to all of you moving forward. Thank you again to our sponsor, the Feuerberg National Law Group, for making this available for you all today, and all of my colleagues who were on the webinar from Stop Hazing and our campus partners. You all are paving the way in what this work can and should look like, and we're so lucky to get to work with you all this afternoon. So if you have lingering questions, especially as you go through the action guide and hopefully as you use and implement some of those resources on campus, please reach out to us. I know Meredith and I put our emails within the chat box. We are always happy to hear from and work with you all as you're navigating those questions on your campus. And other than that, we hope you all have a really great afternoon. If you want to turn on your cameras and wave goodbye, we'd more than welcome that. We'd love to see all of your faces and the community that we've built here today. But we hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and thanks for being with us.
Thanks, everyone.